and to Taffs.
Thank you, and thank all of you for coming. I know some of you have come from quite a way, too. I'd also like to thank the organizers for organizing this event and inviting me to be able to talk to you about why I feel so compelled to work on this issue. With the support of the Canadian Friends Service Committee, I went on a delegation to Palestine with an international Friends of Sabeel group. And as some of you probably are aware, Sabeel means the way in Arabic. And while I was there, we visited 20 peace groups, Israeli and Palestinian. And I videotaped 25 of those speakers. I'd like to share with you a couple of those speakers, what they had to say. One was Rabbi Arik Asherman. He was with Jews for a Just Peace. And he put his life on the line. He would go out to protest and get beaten by the settlers or the Israeli military. And he said he will not quit because what he wants to see is for the Palestinians to have the same human rights as he wants for himself. Also, he's doing it for his children because he wants them to grow up in a peaceful, just society. The other person that I would like to tell you about is Sahar Vardi. She's a young refusenik who refused to go into the military. And she talked about how the Israeli society is militarized. She said that children from about this age up all the way through school are told everyone in the world is out to get them. And they point to different places in history and times where that's actually happened. So when that child grows up and is about to leave school, for those children, they don't think about whether they're going into the military or not. They just think about which branch they're going to go into. But Sahar's case was a bit different, because her father had a friend who was a Palestinian who invited him to go on a peace rally with him. And Sahar decided to go along with her father. And while she was on that peaceful demonstration, an Israeli military person was actually shooting at her, and a Palestinian man pulled her to safety. So when she reached 18 and it's her time to go into the military, she refused. And so she went to jail a few times. And she explained that it's not only people who refuse have to go to jail, but it's really hard for you to get a job afterwards. Because an employer will say, well, I served to defend our society, why haven't you? And as Sahar pointed out, it's not really about the defense of society, it's about the bottom line. The other person I'd like to tell you about is Gerald Horton. He is with, mine's gone blank. Thank you. Military Court Watch, a international group of lawyers who monitor what happens to the Palestinian children in the military courts. Gerald Horton said that Israel has a policy of targeting children. And how they do that is they'll maybe, if a child is thought to have or suspected of throwing stones, about 8 of them will go in a jeep, like 2 in the front and 6 in the back, and go knock at his door, maybe break down the door at 2 in the morning and put a gun to the child's face and get him out of bed, blindfold him and put handcuffs behind him, and then throw him in the bottom of the jeep. And because the seats are filled, he has to go on the floor. Now, I don't know if any of you have been handcuffed, but I have. And once you've got your hands behind your back, there's not much you can do. You can't scratch your nose if it itches. You can't do your jacket up if you're cold. And you certainly can't protect yourself from the military boots when you're lying on the floor of the truck. And then the child is taken off to a detention center where either he's left in the back of the truck alone, still blindfolded, still handcuffed, or out in the elements until 6 or 8 in the 8 or 9 in the morning when the interrogators come. Then once he's taken into the interrogation room, he's subject to verbal and physical abuse. The verbal abuse is not just yelling at him. He's threatened with, if you don't confess and sign the confession form, your father will lose his work permit. Or you won't be allowed to leave here until you confess. And the physical abuse can be put in a stress position, sleep deprivation, or into social isolation, which is very psychologically detrimental to a child. Meanwhile, his parents don't know which detention center he's been taken to. And his father is so humiliated that he wasn't able to protect his child. On the contrast, if a Israeli Jewish child has to be taken in to question, and he's arrested in the daytime, and his parents are allowed to go with him, and he has 24 hours before he has to have 24 hours before he has legal counsel. Where a Palestinian child, it's 90 days before, within 90 days he can have legal counsel. Another thing that Jared Horton said was that the military are becoming proactive, what they call proactive. They'll now go into a child's home and ask him to show him where his bed is, so that child no longer feels safe in his bed because they've said, now we know where to come and get you. So you can see why I feel so compelled to work on this issue. The majority of the groups, or what we heard over and over again, was work on your own government. And you can see why Canada has such a bad reputation in Palestine. When you look even at their voting record in the UN, like last year, 2021, there were 16 recommendations to criticize Israel. Canada only voted for 2 of them. 12, they voted no, and 2 abstentions. And Sahar Bardi, remember I was talking about the refusenick, she said, as Canadian citizens, then it's our responsibility to work on our government. So when I came home from Israel-Palestine, I gave talks. I made videos for the community TV program from the speakers that I had videotaped. But of course, that didn't do any good. Like, nothing changed. But then I kept hearing in my mind, work on your own government, work on your own government. That's what I heard over and over again when I was in Palestine. So I finally got up the courage to go speak to my MP, which was Paul Manley at the time. I explained to him the situation. Unfortunately, he was very sympathetic. And he said, why don't you start a parliamentary e-petition? He explained, if you get 500 Canadian signatures, it will get read out in Parliament and the government has to respond. So I worked with a group of people, we put together the wording, and the ask we decided on was ask for a special envoy to go to Palestine and Israel to monitor what was happening to the Palestinian children by the Israeli military and report back with recommendations. So we managed to get, and the reason we chose that ask is because 18 parliamentarians had gone to Palestine and they came back, and that was part of the recommendations in their report. So we didn't think we were asking for too much, and it was read out in Parliament in November 2020, and we got the response on January 25th, 2021. Needless to say, I was very disappointed with their response. Dorcas can explain more about that. The response, that is, not my disappointment. Well, it was very disappointing. In fact, I was quite depressed. So when Mariana called me and she said, or invited me to join this group across the country, so now I'd like to turn the mic over to Robin is going to introduce.
My perspective of how I became committed to Canada stand up for Palestinian children's rights. So I look around and I see a number of our group here, and I realize that you know all this, but I'm going to tell the story from my perspective and how I became committed to what's going on. So some personal background to indicate why I'm so committed to this. In 2008, while visiting Israel-Palestine as a tourist, I was invited by the Church of Scotland Moderators Tour to go with them to visit Hebron in the Palestinian territories. We visited the headquarters of an Israeli settler community called Kiryat Arba, established illegally in the heart of Hebron. Our conversation flowed back and forth until one of our members asked the spokesperson what resolution he saw as being possible. His response, "I support a one-state solution." Well, we were all rather shocked at the answer, and then someone said, "Well, how do you see that working on the ground?" He responded without hesitation, "One state for the Jews." And we asked, "But what about the Palestinians?" And I quote his response, "I don't give a damn. For all I care, they can drown in the sea." Now, I had read about ethnic cleansing, but I had never heard anyone speak it out loud. I was absolutely thunderstruck. My second visit to Hebron took place the next year when I went to spend some time with my husband Noel, who was living there for 3 months as part of the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Accompaniment Program, a program where international volunteers accompanied Palestinians in their daily life, seeking to observe and act as buffers between them and the Israeli settlers and soldiers. Noel's job was to be at checkpoint 56, one of over 100 Israeli military checkpoints just inside or outside of the city. Twice every day, his job was to monitor the treatment of elementary school children and their teachers as they navigated this checkpoint on their way to Cordoba School. A school which was very close, actually, a stone's throw away from the settler headquarters that I had visited the previous year. When he was present, the soldiers took delight in taunting the children, boys and girls aged 6 to 12, taking their school bags, emptying them on the ground, making them go through the checkpoint multiple times, keeping them waiting much longer than was necessary to be checked, all at the delight of the Israeli settlers, the ever-present settlers who lounged nearby, who cheered the soldiers on, swore at the children, and whistled at the teachers, all of whom were Muslim and female. These occasions in Hebron were my first experience personal experience of the ways in which the Israeli occupation systematically abused the Palestinians. But this was only a beginning. Between 2011 and 2019, Noel and I took mostly Presbyterians, but some others, on study tours, spending most of our time in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem, hearing the stories of Palestinian life under occupation, learning about the history of those who'd inhabited the land for thousands of years. On one unforgettable occasion, we met with children, encouraged them to talk about their lives. While all of the stories were moving, one story stood out for me. A young boy quietly spoke of his daily walk home from school, always on high alert, frightened that the Israeli military would randomly pick him up on the street, arrest him, and no one, including his parents, would have any idea where the soldiers had taken him. Through the words of my colleagues, and Linda has already talked about this, you will hear much more about the violent and dehumanizing system which has been designed to systematically break each new generation of children into submission. It's a story of systemic abuse with nighttime raids on Palestinian homes, handcuffing and blindfolding a child without any indication to the parents as to where they're being taken. The children arrested speak of physical abuse in the form of beatings, emotional abuse in the form of verbal threats or solitary confinement, denial of food or soap or towels or blankets, or worse. The children describe, as Linda said, how often they are threatened that if they don't confess, the soldiers will return to their house, arrest everyone, and bulldoze their house or worse. Well, this, of course, brings me to why I'm committed to the work of Canada Stand Up for Palestinian Children's Rights. Our primary goal is on getting the Canadian Parliament to appoint a special envoy to investigate the military system that incarcerates children as young as 12, the age of majority, according to Israeli military law. A system which is in flagrant violation of not only international and human rights law, but particularly the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, a convention which both Israel and Canada have signed. Our campaign for such a petition has been preceded by two similar requests. Linda spoke of her work on petition E2667, which of course called on the government of Canada to ensure the human rights of Palestinian children are protected by instructing the special envoy to promote, monitor, and report on the human rights situation of Palestinian children living in the occupied territory and Gaza. Linda said I would speak of Rob Oliphant's response. He is the parliamentary secretary who signed the response. He went on to say, and Linda knows this only too well, that children's rights are a top concern of the Canadian government, top concern of our foreign policy, that we are a strong advocate in an effort to end all violations of human rights against children. Yet you heard what Linda said. No action was taken. The e-petition was tabled. And she also mentioned that in 2018, 18 Canadian parliamentarians visited the Palestinian territories. And when they came back, they too asked for this special envoy, upon which Linda built petition E2667. And you can see there on the screen what they asked for. The special envoy to do the work with reference to international and international children's rights, to undertake an evaluative analysis of Israeli military law and practice as they affect Palestinian children, hold Israeli military authorities accountable to their obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law. No action was taken by Parliament. So, what next? If our government doesn't uphold international and human rights laws for Palestinian children, then concerned Canadians have to act. Hence the formation of Canada Stand Up for Palestinian Children's Rights. Many of you know who we are, but you can see there, we're just ordinary citizens, part of Canadian civil society, spread across Canada from west to east, with a common commitment to persuade the Canadian government to act in support of Palestinian children's rights. To that end, we're requesting the appointment of a special envoy, and part of what we're doing is working to tell the story to other Canadians so that they too hear and respond. As advocates, you can see who we are. We're ministers and members of Christian churches, members of the Jewish community, and others, including the grassroots advocacy organization, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. The problem is, of course, that Canada acts so weakly, says so little, is so milquetoastish, not sure that's a word, but milquetoastish. Thank you. That I can imagine that the Israeli government and the Israeli military authorities laugh at us, knowing that we are never going to hold them to account. So here we are. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Our group is committed to educating the Canadian public, asking for their help, your help, in holding the Canadian government accountable to take action to end this illegal system. What can you do? Join us. Actually, I'm missing a slide here, but that's doing since April 2021. Let me tell you. We began a letter writing campaign calling on committed Canadians to join us. Emails after emails, letters after letters followed, and we developed some educational resources. Throughout the year, we have tried to stay up to date on what's happening on the ground in Palestine by inviting knowledgeable people knowledgeable about the military system and the increasing violence of the Israeli occupation to speak at our Zoom meetings, held approximately once a month. In October 21, we planned a webinar in conjunction with the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine. We had two speakers, a Palestinian who actually is Gerard Horton's wife, who told us about the damage to Palestinian children, their families, and their communities from the kind of action that the military were taking. The second speaker was a lawyer, a member of Hamoked, an Israeli human rights group centered in East Jerusalem. And he spoke of their work as advocates of Palestinian parents, helping them to find their children who illegally, according to international law, were placed in prisons within Israel, to which they couldn't go because they couldn't get a permit. So you can imagine the isolation that those children felt. On November the 29th, or as close to it as possible, in conjunction with the United Nations International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, we organized a number of things. My colleagues across the country did some stupendous work. In Halifax, a small group braved challenging weather to just stop passerbys, educating them about how the Israeli military targets and arrests Palestinian children. In Oakville, a group with placards and a candlelight vigil remembered the children who perished in Gaza as a result of the war. Over 70 people gathered in both Waterloo and in Winnipeg, drawing the attention of the CBC to report on their activities. In Saskatchewan, a group set up an information table during the screening of Road March to Apartheid film at the local cinema. 4 events took place on Vancouver Island: Duncan, Victoria, Nanaimo, and Parksville. Others staged public action outside their MP's offices. Others spoke at Sunday services. And at many of these events, we were joined by local Jewish activist groups. And then in March, with the assistance of Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, we drafted a letter to the Prime Minister requesting the appointment and funding of a special envoy. We sent it to the Canada-Palestine Parliamentary Friendship Group, asking them to submit it to the Prime Minister. So let me go back one. What can you do? What can you do? Join us. Join us. We're a small group, and we need your support in writing to your MP, asking for his or her commitment to support the appointment of a special envoy. Visit them. Go to their office. Take your friends and colleagues with them. Take your children. Take your grandchildren. Anyone that will go. We've written a sample letter of commitment that we would encourage you to get the MP to sign to hold them accountable. This initiative is well underway. We have some members of Parliament, just a few, who are committed, who've signed on to our campaign. We have other members who are supportive. And we have other people who are sympathetic, whose names I'm not allowed, according to Marianne, to put up on the screen. But we'll tell you if you want to know if your MP's on that list, and then you can go.
We already know.
Okay, good stuff. Another thing, write letters. Keep writing letters. Bug them as much as you can. Just swamp with letters, emails, whatever you can do. The Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Copied always your own member of Parliament. It's up to us. And I would encourage everyone to keep up to date on information about the Israeli military system. The violence is increasing, and we need to know exactly what's going on the ground so that we can speak with some sense of authority. This is the Military Court Watch, part of their 2021 report. It's very easy to get this information. You can Google it, you can go in, it's there, and it's just there for us to take and to read and digest. These are just some of the stats. Approximately 500 to 1,000 children are detained each year. And we've already talked about how they're arrested at night, but over 95% of the cases end in conviction. Some very startling statistics. Another important thing is join with other Canadian and international organizations seeking peace and justice in Palestine. Only the end of the occupation will save the children. Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, Independent Jewish Voices, our friends are here, Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine, No Way to Treat a Child, Defense for Children International, Zaina is here representing them, Hamoket, Center for the Defense of the Individual, B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center on Human Rights in the occupied territories. As Linda said, we continually ask ourselves, why is it so difficult? Why does Canada unconditionally support Israel with financial assistance, including military hardware? There's a new report out from Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East talking about what is sent to Israel, as much information there as they could get, and we can access it as well. Canada refuses to condemn the crime of occupation, now identified by a number of Israeli, Palestinian, international human rights groups as apartheid. Why is there not equity in how Canada holds international and human rights law? Parliament quickly appointed a special envoy on behalf of the Rohingya. More recently, the government acted boldly and promptly to respond to the situation of aggression in the Ukraine. Yet, on the 70-year-plus aggression of Israel against the Palestinian people, Canada remains silent or spouts platitudes. However, we believe there's hope. We are a hopeful group. We are a really hopeful group.
Yes.
We are hopeful because around the world, it has become clear that civil society is waking up and taking a lead role in the struggle. We need your support so that this little beginning, can be assured of a just end. Thanks very much.